And the letter was written by the Apostle Peter. He's the same one that you know about. So he was a disciple of Jesus. All the stories you know about Peter walking on the water, denying Jesus, all that stuff. This is the same guy. And he also features very heavily in the book of Acts, doesn't he? When they start spreading the gospel, Peter was highly involved in all of that. And he's the same guy, and he writes this letter. And he writes it in the early 60s AD. And he writes this letter, as he says in these opening verses, to God's people. He calls them strangers in the world, reminding them, of course, that their real home, their true home, is in heaven. And they're scattered around because Jewish and Gentile Christians at this point are scattered right through Asia Minor, which is the places that he lists at the beginning of the passage. And they'd experienced quite a lot of persecution, and they were experiencing persecution. And so he writes this letter by way of encouragement to them. Some people have called it a letter of hope in the midst of suffering. So look at what he says about hope in verse 3. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope. Just as when we're born naturally, we're born into a family, we're born into a nation. When we're reborn, we are reborn into this living hope. That's who we are. That's our identity. That speaks of where we're from. It speaks of where we're going. That is who we are. And so we come to our theme this morning, be hopeful. And the first thing I think probably for us to do is to be clear on what this word hope means. We use it all the time in everyday speech, don't we? We'll say, I hope you have a good day, hope you feel better soon, hope it rains soon. And we use it all the time, but what we're really meaning when we say those things, it's more of a wishing or a willing something to happen for yourself or someone else, isn't it? But biblical hope is something completely different. Biblical hope is not wishful thinking. Hope is a firm conviction directed towards the future. It's the confident affirmation that God is faithful and that he will complete what he has begun. Someone said hope is the proper response to the promises of God. We believe those things he's promised, and our response to that is hope. It's the belief that that's going to happen. And we live differently because of that. John Piper said, biblical hope not only desires something good for the future, but it expects it to happen. And Peter, in this passage, gives us a pretty good definition of hope, I think. In verse 8, he says, though you've not seen him, you love him. Even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy. And I love this verse because this is Peter, who was there firsthand with Jesus when Jesus said this. When Jesus was resurrected and he showed himself to the disciples and Thomas didn't believe about it, and then Jesus comes and shows himself, and Jesus says, you've seen me and you believe, but blessed are those who haven't seen me and yet who believe. And Peter, 30 years later, is now writing this to encourage these believers who hadn't seen Jesus. We haven't seen him bodily, but he says, you believe in him and you're filled with joy because you believe in him. That's hope. I believe this about Jesus. I believe this about the future, and I am now changed because of that hope, because of those promises. But how can this conviction be so firm? Like, what makes biblical hope different to just wishing or hoping like we do in life about anything else? Well, he tells us in verse 3, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. That is a solid fact that we believe. Jesus' resurrection secures for his people their new birth and the hope that they will be resurrected just as he was. So the fact that Jesus came back to life, was resurrected, is what shows us that all the other promises he's given us are also true, and they will also happen even if we have to wait for them. It's all based on the resurrection. Jesus came back to life like he said he would, which means we can trust that all the other things he says are going to happen, like the fact that we will be raised with him, those things are going to happen as well. And hope is our sure conviction that those things are true, and just because we haven't seen them happen yet, they still are going to happen. And so we live in a different way. We live with hope because we believe those things to be true. Now, even though we can try and explain what hope is, it's still a little bit of an abstract concept, isn't it? But there's a great word in the Hebrew that they use in the Old Testament for hope, which is a much more kind of solid, tangible explanation for it. I love it. See if this helps with understanding what hope is. So in the Hebrew, one of the words for hope is also the word for cord, like rope. And the first time it's used in the Old Testament is in the story of Rahab and the spies. And do you remember these two spies were going to spy out the land that they believed God had given them, and they were going to check it out. And on the way, they hid in Rahab's house this woman who just hid them and looked after them, and she risked her life in doing so, but she hid them. So they were safe, and they could then go off and spy out the land. And she said to them, well, because I've shown kindness to you, because I've hidden you, how about you show kindness to me? Will you spare me and all my family? Will you assure me that you will keep us safe? And they said, yes, we will. And what you need to do is you need to take this scarlet cord, there's the word, and you need to put it out of your window and leave it there. And when we come back, we will see that scarlet cord and we will save you and everyone in your household. So she puts out this scarlet cord and they go off and they spy out the land. And when God's people have gone into the land, she is waiting with this red rope hanging from her window, hoping that they're going to come back and save her. And sure enough, they come back, and her and all her household are saved, and the rest of that city is burned. She put that red rope out the window as her hope. She'd been promised that they were going to come back and save her. She believed they would, and she put that hope out there. She put that cord out there, but it still hadn't happened yet. She hadn't actually been rescued yet. But that was her sure thing. That was her thing to cling on to. You know, in life, we are all clinging on to something or someone, aren't we? It's probably different for each of us here this morning and each of the people we know, but we cling on to things. They're things that we feel like they're our security, like we'll just be okay if that thing works out. Or I think I'm just going to put my hope in something. And we cling on to stuff. And you know, hope says, cling on to me, because I am that solid rope that will lead you to God. Cling on. Even though you don't see it yet, the promises you have been made will come to pass. So what does this mean for us? What does it mean to be hopeful in this coming week? I think firstly, being hopeful means that we live with purpose. We live with purpose. The Bible speaks of salvation in 3 parts. It speaks about salvation in the past, like when you first believed. So Titus 3, for example, he saved us, not because of righteous things we've done, but because of his mercy. That's in the past. There was a moment, if you know Jesus today, there was a moment when you believed him. And he called you and you were saved. That was in the past. That was a moment when you were saved. The Bible also speaks of salvation in the present, though. It talks about the continuing process of salvation or sanctification. Look at verse 9 of this passage. You are receiving the goal of your faith, the salvation of your souls. That's present tense. We are receiving it. Or Paul writes, to us who are being saved. It's going on all the time. And then it talks about salvation in the future, when Jesus returns and salvation will be completed. You know, Peter says here in verse 5, the salvation that is ready to be revealed at the last time. Like it hasn't all happened yet. It's just holding on, bursting, ready to burst out. And it's ready to be revealed at the last time. But hope means that right now, in my present situation, everything I'm facing in my everyday life right now, and everything I will face in the future, is worth something. Hope tells me that I am being changed. Hope tells me that I am being saved. Hope tells me that I'm on my way somewhere. Hope tells me I've got some momentum. I know how this ultimately ends, and I've got my rope out that window, and I am clinging onto it, and I believe that this is going to happen, and I will live differently because of it. Hope means I live with purpose. It means I see my everyday life differently. It's like the three builders who were building on this building site. They were all working on the same project, and the foreman comes along, and he asks the first one, "Oh, what are you doing today?" "I'm mixing cement." And he says, "Okay." And he walks along to the next one, and the second one, he says, "Oh, what are you doing today?" And he says, "Piling bricks." And he walks along to the third one, and he says, "What are you doing today?" Puts down his tools, he takes a deep breath, and he looks at the building site, and he says, "I'm building a beautiful cathedral." And hope does that for us. Hope changes our perspective. Hope lets us see what we're going through right now has meaning and purpose behind it because we're on our way somewhere. This is being worked out in us. This salvation that's going to be revealed at the last time is being worked out in us and grown in us every day through all the situations that we face. Like without hope, ask me what I'm doing at any given moment this week. "Oh, I'm going to work. I'm doing the weekly food shop. I'm trying to stop my kids fighting." Or with hope, ask me what I'm doing at any given moment this week. I'll say, well, I'm taking the opportunity for this situation to change me because Jesus has risen and he's going to raise me to life again with him, and I am being changed on my way there. That is the truth of what hope is, and that's what it does to us in the everyday. Do you see how it's not just about the future, but it's right now as well? The point is that hope makes a difference to my here and now, to my present. If I believe to the very core of my being, the songs that we've sung this morning, if I believe in God the Father, I believe in God the Son, I believe in the Holy Spirit, and I believe in the resurrection, that I will be raised, I will be different today, and not just when he comes back in the future. It means that every single thing that you are facing, it means that every single thing that anyone you know and love is facing right now, the worst griefs, the highest joys, the mundane of everyday life, all those things bring on fresh, new meaning when we live with hope. Because it's not just about now, it's about I'm being changed, I'm on my way somewhere. This is part of the journey of being saved and being changed. John Maxwell says, where there is no hope in the future, there is no power in the present. They're strongly linked. What we believe about the future and how we live now are strongly linked. I heard about a boy who was really, really ill in hospital. And he wasn't responding to treatments. The prognosis wasn't good. And a teacher from his school was sent to teach him a lesson. So the teacher went to the hospital, and she was teaching him about verbs and adverbs. And anyway, she sort of did the lesson, went away, shuffled off, didn't think she'd got anywhere with it particularly. Anyway, she went back the next day to do the same thing. And before she got to the boy's room, a nurse stopped her and said, "What on earth did you do to that boy yesterday?" She said, "He's like a completely different child." She said, "Medically, he is now improving." She said, "His spirits are high. What on earth did you do?" I said, "Oh, nothing. I taught him about verbs and adverbs." So she went in and asked the boy, "What's changed?" Oh, he said, "It's simple." He said, "The school aren't going to send someone to teach a dying boy about verbs and adverbs." He figured, I must be doing okay. And so because of what he believed about his future, it completely changed his present. He thought, well, I'm not dying. I've got everything to live for, right? Let's learn about verbs and adverbs. So it totally changed what he believed about the future, changed him in the present. I heard about they did an experiment in the army, and 2 sets of soldiers were sent on a long march in a desert. And one set were told exactly how long the march was going to be and where it was going to end and how long it was going to take them. And they set off. And the other army weren't told how long this march was going to be or if it was ever going to end. And off they went as well. And they measured the stress levels in each of the soldiers. And the stress levels in the group that didn't know if this march was ever going to end or when it was going to end, the stress levels were way higher than the ones that knew exactly how long they were marching for and exactly where they were going to end. Because they had hope, I guess. They knew this was going to end somewhere. They knew there was a purpose to this thing. Whereas the others were just sort of left meandering and just going and going and going and going, didn't see any purpose to it. They didn't see the end point. What we believe about the future totally makes a difference to the here and now. So with hope, we can live now like we're on our way somewhere, like we're part way through a process. We don't need to be blown around by the waves. We know how this ends. We can live with a sense of meaning. And I do promise you that I have trialed this week. I promise I wouldn't tell you to do something if I hadn't tried it out myself. And as I've been learning about hope this week, I have really tried for it to make a difference to how I deal with family life, shall we say. And the challenging times of a 3 and a 6-year-old. And yes, I tear my hair out still, but I have sometimes this week have been able to take a step back and go, you know what? This is not just about 2 fighting boys. This is actually a chance for me to learn some patience. This is actually a chance for the fruits of the Spirit to be grown in me. God can still do something right now, even though my red cord is still hanging out that window and not everything is finished yet. God is still doing stuff in me right now. So the first thing about being hopeful is that it means we live with purpose. Secondly, being hopeful means we live in peace. It's a wonderful thing about hope that it's not only you that has it. If you know Jesus, then it's something that we share. It's a joint hope. We together believe the promises of God and are living out our proper responses by living in the hope, in the belief that they'll be fulfilled. So not only does hope mean that life is changed for me on a very personal level, it brings meaning and purpose to my individual life. It also has an effect on our corporate life together as believers. I'm not on my own in being changed, in being shaped, or being on my way somewhere. There are followers all around the world today, followers of Jesus, who are trying to live in hope. And you know what? Some of them have been placed in the seats and the rows next to us here. And these are the people who we bump along with on our way there. And so we would do well to really show respect and honour and kindness and compassion to the people who also are hope dwellers. You know, verse 4, Peter talks about this inheritance that can never perish, spoil or fade. It's an inheritance that is kept in heaven for you. You know, it's a joint inheritance. We're all on our way there. It's being kept there for all of us. We sing worship songs together, standing shoulder to shoulder in this church. We sing these songs together about hope. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. We sang it this morning. I'm holding on to hope. I'm holding on to grace. Our God, you reign forever. Our hope, our together hope, our strong deliverer. In Christ alone, my hope is found. We're heading in the same direction. You know, if you're going on a long journey with someone, it's just common sense that says you better all get along. It's going to be much better if you do. I'll give you an example of how not to do it. If you're wondering what it looks like to make a good first impression on people who you're thinking you're going on a long journey with, a few years ago, my husband Andy and I joined something you might have heard of, which is an NCT group. So this is when you have your first child and there's various options of what you might want to do for antenatal classes, and one of them is NCT. And really, you do NCT rather than any of the other classes because they all teach you about what it's like to give birth, they all teach you about what it's like to look after a baby, but they sort of say NCT is the one where you buy friends because they have a very good way of making sure you all get along, and you basically, they think, pay your money, and here's a group of friends that will see you right through having all your babies, right through childhood. You just do it all at the same time, all together, and it's a great support. And we thought, great, that'll be worth it. Let's pay some money, we'll buy some friends. So we turn up, and the first session that Andy was at, the teacher asked us to talk about our fears about having our first child. So we're sort of looking around the room at complete strangers at this point. We don't know these people at all. But we sort of have in the back of our mind, we're going on this really significant, important journey with them. We know, people say, 25 years later, my NCT class, or I still go on holiday with them, you know, so I'm projecting forward going, you're basically my new best mate, so I don't know you yet. So I'm thinking, come on, Andy, say something good. So people go around and say their fears, and it comes to Andy's turn. And he says with a completely straight face to a whole room full of people from Tunbridge Wells and the surrounding areas, and he's Scottish and proud, he says, my worst fear, my child's going to grow up with a Kent accent. I mean, talk about win friends and influence people. Know your audience. Anyway, we have clawed it back and they are great friends. That is not how to go about it. If you are going to be on a long journey with people, headed in the same direction, doing significant life stuff together, which we are, we better learn to get along. This is from a careers website, the top 6 things to do to get on with your co-workers. Now, I know church is not an office like your workplace might be, but there are some common sense tips in here that might go a long way in church as well. Number 1, respect your colleagues. Number 2, get your workplace relationships off to a good start. Number 3, find a way to get along with even the most difficult people. Number 4, don't spread malicious gossip. Number 5, practice good etiquette. And number 6, be kind to your co-workers. This is a standard that is set for secular office and workplaces all over the land. We shouldn't just meet those requirements. We should be way higher. The Bible has a list as well. Love one another. Love your neighbour as yourself. Do not take revenge. Above everything, love one another earnestly. Be like-minded, be sympathetic, be compassionate and humble. Love one another. Being hopeful means that we firmly believe we are going in the same direction as this group of people. So we would do well to live in peace together. And finally, being hopeful means that we share hope. Living with hope, as I've tried to practice this week, is something that you can't keep to yourself. It's a way of life that is noticed, I think. Hope can be shared, hope can be caught, hope wants to move around and bring hope to more and more people. You might feel that whenever we talk about any kind of mission or evangelism here at church, you go, yes, Naomi, yeah, I know you really believe in that, and you nod and you smile and you think, don't know how that's actually going to work out in my friendship group. How would I ever bring up the name of Jesus in my friendship group? And I totally get that. And you might think that my family who don't know Jesus, my friends who don't know Jesus, they don't think they need to know Jesus. They don't feel they have a need for Jesus. And I absolutely get that. But I'll tell you one thing. They sure as heck need hope. Everyone needs hope in their lives. J.I. Packer said, the Christian message is that there is hope for a ruined humanity. There's hope of pardon, hope of peace with God, and hope of glory. Peter says later in this letter, in chapter 3, always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you about the hope that you have. That tells me that you're living this hope out loud, that you're living this hope in front of people. You've got to be, if they're going to notice it and ask you about it, and you be prepared to give a reason for it. Because living with purpose, living in peace with each other, they are qualities that are attractive. They will literally attract people to you if you live in this way. Remember that red cord hanging out the window? That hope? That waiting? That's a very public thing, wasn't it? It was hung right out the window for all to see. And I would encourage all of us, if we really believe this stuff, if we really believe what we've sung this morning, if we really believe the gospel of Jesus Christ, if we really believe that he has saved us and is saving us and will save us, then we should live this very publicly and allow people to ask their questions about why we're so sure and why we live on such a firm foundation. Why we live on such a solid rock, and why even though we don't know the exact details of the future, why we're okay with that, and why we're at peace, and why we feel like we've got some momentum, we're moving somewhere, we're being improved and we're being changed day by day. Why? That's when you mention the name of Jesus. So be the person in your office who encourages others. Be the person in your neighbourhood who is constant. Be the person in your friendship group who doesn't doesn't change and sometimes want to know people and sometimes not. Be the solid one. Live this stuff out loud, because we should share hope. We should live differently, outwardly, if we have hope. Let me finish with this. You'll remember the Thai boys who were stuck in that cave. And it's so amazing that they came out safely, and they're so thrilled to be out safely, and their families are so thrilled, and we're also thrilled that they came out safely. But you'll also remember that there was a diver who lost his life rescuing them. Lieutenant Commander Saman Gunan was placing oxygen tanks that were going to be used in their rescue when his oxygen ran out, and he died in the process. Well, the boys have been very aware of that, and whatever you read about them, they've been very public about the fact that they are aware that someone died to rescue them. And so this week, quite amazingly, a number of those boys took part in a ceremony where they were ordained as novice Buddhist monks in honour of the guy that died to save them. And their families were there. There was a big painting of the diver who died. And the diver's widow carried the robes for the boys to wear in the ceremony. And one of the monks wrote this: the boys and their coach said they would be ordained for Lieutenant Commander Saman Gunan because he sacrificed himself for them. Being ordained for him is their way to show their gratitude and their thanks. It seems like that sacrifice is something that hasn't been missed. It's not been lost on those boys. And they're now going to live their lives outwardly, very differently, because of that. And of course, our story is that someone died to rescue us, to secure our salvation. And we can do something for him, to honour him and to show our gratitude to him. We can live with hope. We can live this week in a way that says, I believe he died, but I believe he rose again, and I believe he is coming back to raise me to life again. Let's not waste a moment of our lives. Let's live it in a way that honours the one who gave his life to secure our salvation.